It was just past midnight when I heard the knock. 3 soft taps that seemed to echo through my quiet apartment. I wasn't expecting anyone, especially not at this hour. My heart skipped a beat as I glanced at the clock. 12:17 a.m. Who could possibly be at my door? I paused the episode of The Office I'd been mindlessly watching, the sudden silence making the apartment feel even emptier than before. I'd been living alone for about 8 months now, and while I enjoyed my independence, nights like these sometimes carried a weight of loneliness I couldn't quite shake off. I approached the door cautiously, peering through the peephole. The distorted fisheye view revealed a familiar face. Alex, my best friend since college. We'd been inseparable for years, sharing everything from late-night study sessions to career celebrations. But seeing him at my doorstep at this hour was unusual. Alex was the definition of routine, early to bed, early to rise. He was the friend who would check his watch at 10 p.m. and announce he needed to head home. So what was he doing here now? I opened the door to find Alex standing there, his usually composed demeanor replaced with something I rarely saw: vulnerability. His dark hair was slightly disheveled, as if he'd been running his fingers through it repeatedly. He wore a simple gray t-shirt and jeans, nothing that suggested he'd planned to go out tonight. "Hey," he said, his voice quieter than usual. "I know it's late. Is it okay if I come in?" There was something in his eyes that stopped me from making the joke that would normally come so easily between us. Instead, I stepped aside, gesturing for him to enter. "Of course. Everything okay?" Alex walked in, his movements hesitant as if he wasn't sure he should be there. I'd seen him in my apartment hundreds of times before, sprawled on my couch watching football games, helping me assemble IKEA furniture, or just hanging out with our friend group for movie nights. But tonight felt different. There was a tension in the air I couldn't quite place. "Want something to drink?" I offered, falling back on hospitality to ease the strange atmosphere. "I've got beer, wine, or I can make some tea." "Tea would be good, actually," he replied, settling onto my couch. This surprised me slightly. Alex was usually a beer-or-nothing kind of guy when it came to late-night conversations. I busied myself in the kitchen, filling the electric kettle and grabbing 2 mugs. The familiar routine gave me a moment to wonder what could have brought Alex here at this hour. Had something happened with his girlfriend? They'd been dating for about 6 months, and while I hadn't spent much time with them as a couple, things had seemed fine the last time we all had dinner together. Or was it work? Alex had been under pressure at his architectural firm, working on a major project with an impossible deadline. The kettle clicked off, and I poured hot water over the tea bags, watching as the color slowly seeped into the water. I carried the mugs back to the living room, handing one to Alex before sitting on the opposite end of the couch. "So," I began, blowing gently on my tea. "Not that I'm not happy to see you, but midnight visits aren't exactly your style. What's going on?" Alex stared into his mug, as if the answers might be floating among the tea leaves. "I broke up with Megan," he said finally. "Oh," I responded, genuinely surprised. "I'm sorry. When did this happen?" "Tonight. About 3 hours ago." He took a sip of his tea, wincing slightly at the heat. "It's been coming for a while, I think. We just want different things." I nodded sympathetically. Breakups were tough, and Alex had always taken relationships seriously. "Do you want to talk about it?" He shrugged, a gesture so uncharacteristically uncertain for him. Alex was usually decisive, confident in his opinions and choices. "Not really. Or maybe I do. I don't know." He set his mug down on the coffee table. "I just didn't want to be alone tonight, and you're the first person I thought of." There was something warming about being someone's first thought in a moment of need. Alex and I had always been close, but we also had other friends he could have turned to. The fact that he chose to come to me meant something, though I wasn't entirely sure what. "Well, I'm glad you're here," I said truthfully. "And you can stay as long as you need to." The conversation shifted to safer topics for a while. We talked about the latest episode of a show we both followed, complained about our respective workloads, and reminisced about a particularly disastrous camping trip we'd taken with friends last summer. It was comfortable, familiar territory, but I could sense Alex was holding something back. There was a restlessness in the way he kept shifting position, in how his eyes would meet mine and then quickly dart away. As the clock approached 1 a.m., I expected him to make motions toward leaving. Instead, he seemed to settle deeper into the couch, as if preparing for a longer stay. The space between us on the couch had gradually decreased as our conversation flowed. What had started as us sitting at opposite ends had evolved into a closer proximity, our knees occasionally brushing when one of us turned to face the other. "Remember that night in our senior year?" Alex said suddenly, "when we stayed up until sunrise talking about what we wanted from life?" I smiled at the memory. We had been at a party that neither of us was particularly enjoying, so we'd escaped to the roof of his apartment building with a bottle of whiskey and talked for hours. "You said you wanted to design buildings that would change city skylines, and to have a dog named Archimedes." He laughed, the sound warming the space between us. "And you wanted to travel to at least 30 countries before turning 30. How's that going, by the way? You're at what, 12 now?" 14. "Thank you very much," I corrected with mock indignation. "And I've still got time." "You always did dream bigger than the rest of us," Alex said, his voice taking on a softer quality. There was something in his tone that made me look at him more closely. The light from my table lamp cast soft shadows across his face, highlighting the strong line of his jaw and the slight crinkles around his eyes when he smiled. I'd always objectively known Alex was attractive. He'd never had trouble getting dates, but I'd never really let myself dwell on it. He was my straight best friend, after all. That territory came with clear boundaries. "What else did we talk about that night?" I asked, trying to steer my thoughts back to safer ground. Alex's expression grew more serious. "We talked about love, about how we'd know when we found the right person." He paused, his eyes meeting mine with an intensity that made my breath catch. I said I thought it would be someone who challenged me, who made me see the world differently, someone who felt like home. There was something loaded in his words, a weight to them that seemed to press against my chest. I wasn't sure how to respond, so I deflected with humor, as I often did when conversations ventured into emotional territory. "And then you spent the next 4 years dating people who were basically carbon copies of each other." Instead of laughing, Alex held my gaze. Maybe I was looking in the wrong places. The air between us seemed to thicken. I became acutely aware of how close we were sitting, of the faint scent of his cologne, of how his hand rested just inches from mine on the couch cushion. There was a tension that hadn't been there before, or perhaps it had always been there, just beneath the surface, and we'd both been careful not to acknowledge it. "What are you saying, Alex?" I asked, my voice quieter than I intended. He ran a hand through his hair, a nervous gesture I'd seen countless times over the years. "I don't know exactly. That's the problem." He let out a frustrated sigh. "I broke up with Megan because I couldn't stop thinking about someone else. And that terrifies me because it's not what I expected to feel." My heart was hammering in my chest now. Was he saying what I thought he was saying? I'd had feelings for Alex on and off over the years, but I'd always buried them deep, convinced that nothing could ever come of them. He was straight. He dated women. He was my best friend, and that was all he would ever be. I'd made peace with that long ago, or at least, I thought I had. "Who?" I asked, though part of me was afraid to hear the answer. Alex looked down at his hands. "You," he said simply. The word hung in the air between us, changing everything and nothing all at once. I sat there, stunned into silence. This wasn't happening. This was the kind of scenario I'd imagined in quiet moments of weakness, only to dismiss as impossible fantasy. Alex was straight. He'd never shown any interest in men before, let alone in me specifically. "But you're not," I began, unable to finish the thought. "Gay," Alex supplied. "No, I don't think I am. But I don't think I'm entirely straight either." He let out a small, self-deprecating laugh. "Turns out sexuality is more complicated than I thought." "How long have you?" I trailed off again, still struggling to process what was happening. "Felt this way about you." Alex finished. "I don't know exactly. It wasn't a sudden realization. More like a slow dawning that the way I feel about you isn't how I feel about other friends." He paused, looking uncertain. "I didn't come here tonight planning to tell you this. I just needed to see you, to be around you. But sitting here, I couldn't keep pretending." I nodded slowly, trying to gather my thoughts. Part of me wanted to jump in with my own confession, to tell him that I'd had feelings for him too, on and off over the years. But another part was cautious. What if this was just confusion on his part? A reaction to his breakup? The last thing I wanted was to be someone's experiment, especially when that someone meant so much to me. "Alex," I said carefully, "you just broke up with Megan a few hours ago. Are you sure this isn't just, I don't know, emotional fallout from that?" He shook his head firmly. "The breakup happened because of these feelings, not the other way around. It wouldn't have been fair to stay with her when I'm thinking about someone else. He reached out, his hand hovering near mine, but not quite touching. I understand if you don't feel the same way. I value our friendship more than anything, and I don't want to jeopardize that. If you want me to leave, or if you need time to process this, I completely understand. The sincerity in his voice was unmistakable. This wasn't a drunken confession or a momentary lapse in judgment. Alex had clearly been thinking about this for some time, and now he was putting himself out there, making himself vulnerable in a way I'd never seen before. Slowly, deliberately, I closed the distance between our hands, letting my fingers rest lightly on his. "I don't want you to leave," I said softly. "And I don't think you're confused. But it's a lot to take in." Alex nodded, relief visible in his expression. "I know, and I'm not expecting anything to happen tonight. I just needed you to know." We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of his confession settling around us. Outside, I could hear the distant sound of a car alarm, a reminder that the world continued to exist beyond the bubble of my apartment, beyond this moment that felt suspended in time. "So what happens now?" I asked eventually. Alex smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. "Now we talk. About what this means, about what we both want. No pressure, no expectations, just honesty." And so we talked. For hours, we talked. About when he first started questioning his feelings for me. About the times I caught myself thinking of him as more than a friend. We talked about our fears, his fear of coming out, of how friends and family might react, my fear of risking our friendship for something that might not work out. We talked about boundaries and what taking things slowly might look like. As we talked, the physical space between us continued to shrink. What had started as a casual touch of hands evolved into sitting shoulder to shoulder, then to his arm draped comfortably around my shoulders. Each point of contact felt electric, charged with years of unacknowledged attraction. It was nearly 4 a.m. when our conversation finally began to slow. We'd covered so much ground, shared so many thoughts and feelings that had been left unsaid for too long. Yet there was still one boundary we hadn't crossed, one line we hadn't redrawn. "It's late," I said, noting how the night had slipped away from us. "You should probably stay over." It wasn't an unusual offer. Alex had crashed on my couch plenty of times before after late nights. "Yeah," he agreed, but neither of us moved. There was a question hanging in the air between us, unasked but palpable. Finally, Alex turned to face me fully, his expression a mixture of nervousness and determination. "Can I kiss you?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. My heart raced as I nodded, unable to find words. And then his lips were on mine, hesitant at first, then with growing confidence. It was nothing like I'd imagined. It was better. There was none of the awkwardness I'd feared, none of the doubt. It felt right, like a puzzle piece clicking into place after years of being just slightly misaligned. When we finally pulled apart, Alex rested his forehead against mine, his eyes closed. "I've been wanting to do that for a long time," he admitted. "Me too," I confessed, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders with the admission. We didn't go further than that kiss. We both agreed we needed time to adjust to this shift in our relationship. But when we finally went to bed, it wasn't to separate spaces. Alex followed me to my bedroom, and we fell asleep side by side, his arm draped protectively over my waist. Morning came with soft sunlight filtering through my blinds and the unfamiliar but welcome sensation of not waking up alone. Alex was still asleep, his features relaxed in a way I rarely saw when he was awake. I allowed myself a moment to simply look at him, to take in the reality of what had happened last night. When he finally stirred, opening his eyes to find me watching him, he smiled, a sleepy, unguarded smile that made my heart flutter. "Morning," he murmured. "Morning," I replied, suddenly feeling shy despite the hours of intimate conversation we'd shared. "Sleep okay?" "Better than I have in months," he said, stretching slightly before settling back beside me. "You?" I nodded, unable to stop smiling. "Yeah, really good." There was an awkward moment as we both seemed to realize the newness of our situation, the unfamiliar territory we were navigating. But then Alex reached out, brushing a strand of hair from my face with a tenderness that dissolved any tension. "So," he said, his voice still rough with sleep, "breakfast?" Just like that, we fell into a routine that was both familiar and entirely new. I made coffee while Alex rummaged through my refrigerator, pulling out eggs and the remains of a bell pepper to make omelets. We moved around each other in my small kitchen with an ease born of years of friendship. But now there were new elements. A hand on the small of my back as Alex reached past me for a spatula, my fingers lingering on his when I handed him a mug of coffee. As we sat at my tiny kitchen table eating breakfast, I couldn't help but marvel at how normal it all felt. Despite the monumental shift in our relationship, despite the confessions and the kiss and sleeping in the same bed, there was a comfort between us that hadn't changed. "What are you thinking about?" Alex asked, noticing my contemplative expression. "Just how this feels both completely different and exactly the same," I admitted. "Like, we're still us, but also something more now." He nodded, understanding immediately as he often did. "I know what you mean. I was worried things would be weird this morning, but it's not. It's just right." "So what happens next?" I asked, voicing the question that had been on my mind since I woke up. "With us, I mean." Alex reached across the table, taking my hand in his. "We take it one day at a time. We figure it out together." He squeezed my hand gently. "All I know is that I want to see where this goes. I want to be with you, not just as friends, but as whatever we're becoming." The certainty in his voice, the steadiness of his gaze, reassured me in a way nothing else could have. This wasn't a fleeting impulse or a momentary confusion. This was Alex, my best friend, the person who knew me better than almost anyone, choosing to cross a boundary we'd both respected for years because what waited on the other side was worth the risk. "I want that too," I said, returning the pressure of his hand with my own. "I have for a long time." After breakfast, Alex reluctantly said he needed to head home to change before work. We stood at my door, neither of us quite ready for him to leave despite knowing we'd see each other again soon. "Dinner tonight," he suggested, his hands resting lightly on my waist. "My place. I'll cook," I smiled, remembering all the times I'd teased him about his limited culinary skills. "As long as you're not making that pasta dish that nearly set your kitchen on fire." He laughed, pulling me closer. "I've improved since then, I promise." His expression grew more serious, though his eyes remained warm. "Thank you for last night. For listening, for understanding. For everything. Thank you for being brave enough to say something," I replied. "I don't know if I ever would have." Alex leaned in, kissing me softly before pulling back with a smile. "See you tonight," he said, finally stepping away. As I closed the door behind him, I leaned against it, taking a deep breath. My straight best friend had knocked at midnight, and in the hours that followed, everything had changed. The boundaries of our friendship had been redrawn, making space for something new, something with potential I'd never allowed myself to fully imagine. I didn't know exactly what the future held for us. There would be challenges ahead, telling our friends and families, navigating Alex's coming out process, learning how to be partners as well as friends. But standing there in my apartment, which still held traces of his presence, his mug on the coffee table, the indent of his head on my pillow, I felt a certainty I hadn't expected. Whatever came next, we would face it together. And that midnight knock, that moment of courage when Alex chose to be honest about his feelings, had set us on a path I was finally ready to walk. Total _char_count, 13,923.